No pasaba tiempo con mis hijos, trabajaba los 7 días de la semana para poder pagar ese abogado, mi esposo igual.
I've watched a lot of detentions. I cry every time.
I lost connection to my son. Like it took me down like a place where I never been before. Like it was so sad because it was my son. It was my life. It was everything.
It's easier for anybody to target a group that is trying to make themselves invisible.
In 1789, just 13 years after the United States was established, while anticipating a war with France, Congress passed 4 laws called the Alien and Sedition Acts. These laws raised the residency requirements to 14 years, authorized the president to deport illegal immigrants, and authorized the arrest, imprisonment, and deportation of illegal immigrants during wartime. They created the Immigration and Nationalization Services, or the INS, and customs agencies. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and the Immigration Act of 1924 greatly limited immigration to the US. They created a maximum limit of immigrants from each country, heavily favoring Europe.
Racism played a part in the establishment of our first immigration laws, where people didn't like the color or the language of people who were coming. So they established these laws where you needed to have either a relative or a sponsor to come to the United States.
Around the middle of the century, the system started to change. The Immigration and Nationality Act, which passed on June 27, 1952, increased the number of European and Asian immigrants that would be allowed to immigrate to the US. It also established that the US must provide a minimum of 100 visas per country, and created legal pathways for family reunification. In 1965, the Hart-Celler Act revised the Immigration and Nationality Act. It completely removed national quotas, rather focusing on admitting skilled workers and families. Although the policies were more inclusive, enforcement became more violent towards the end of the 20th century.
There's a memorandum put out by the Border Patrol in 1994 saying that there would be a mortal danger, that people could die crossing, and if they died, then the word of mouth would get around and it would deter people. That's thus the deterrence strategy. That strategy started in 1994. That's the main strategy to the day. The difference is in 1994, there's a $1.5 billion budget for border and immigration enforcement, and Department of Homeland Security still did not exist.
In 1996, there was the Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, which made punishments for immigration harsher, deportation became stronger, and border patrols became more militant.
Immigration enforcement has changed many times over time in the course of our history. We have been at some points very open to immigration, welcoming of immigrants, in particular where we needed their labor. And at other times we have been sort of very xenophobic, very hostile to immigrants, targeted immigrants, blamed immigrants for all of our woes. And we seem to kind of go from one to the other. And right now, we are in a moment of extreme xenophobia. But after 9/11, we saw a similar kind of focus. It's understandably, in some sense, not to justify it, but understandably, we were attacked by a foreign organization. So you saw the government rounding up many immigrants simply because they were Arab, Muslim men, and therefore presumptively dangerous, presumptively terrorist. They would be locked up on whatever excuse the government could come up with. But many people spent long periods of time in detention.
Just 45 days after 9/11, the Patriot Act was passed. Its purpose was to make it harder for terrorists to enter the country, giving the government the ability to block entry for whoever they believed may have been a threat to national security. In truth, it had the effect of making immigration harder for everyone.
Border Patrol, of course, existed since 1924. CBP, this whole new kind of like one analyst put it, a domestic army really formed with this priority mission to stop terrorists and weapons of mass destruction from crossing the U.S. borders.
In 2002, the Homeland Security Act was passed, and then became active on March 3, 2003. It combined 22 federal immigration agencies, such as the INS and Customs, into the Department of Homeland Security. Within it, 3 new agencies were created: Customs and Border Protections, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the Bureau of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or as it's better known, ICE.
Like 2 years after I arrived to the US, I got picked up by the immigration. But actually, it was it wasn't the immigration, it was just like a regular stop. But this cop was a really racist cop that he started asking me for my papers, my IDs, and all the stuff. And but I kind of my English wasn't good. It's not as good like it was now, but back then it was crazy because I asked them, I know my rights. You must bring someone who speaks Spanish to me and explain me what's going on, because this is not right. What are you doing? Like, he didn't care. He just take me out of the car, put me in handcuffs, and take me to the jail in the little town. It was called Taunton, Connecticut. And they put me in arrest, and they make me talk to the immigration. Everything was no legal, right? Like wasn't legal at all, but they were doing it anyway.
I mean, particularly given that many immigrants don't speak English or don't speak English very well. Even if you speak English, the rules of the immigration law are Byzantine. They are extremely complicated. They use all kinds of jargon. And so you're just not going to be able to defend yourself if you're there alone.
Claudia Rosales is the director of the Pioneer Valley Workers Center based in Springfield. The center works to educate, organize, and empower immigrant workers across Western Massachusetts, notably leading Know Your Rights training, individual support for workers, and advocating for improved conditions on the job.
Soy una persona de la comunidad impactada. Yo estoy en este país y creo que me veo afectada como muchas familias indocumentadas, y a veces tenemos falta de desinformación porque yo pasé por eso. No sabía que tenía derecho en este país. Entonces eran violados, y creo que por eso es importante enseñar a nuestra comunidad.
We make evident the fact that yes, you're going to be exercising your rights, but you're going to be exercising your rights in front of somebody who is fully armed and possibly fully escalated. Those are tactics. Those are tactics that they use to intimidate and to force people to either to not exercise their rights or to give information that the person has the right not to disclose. When we're talking about constitutional rights and we're talking about civil rights, those are independently of your immigration status, or if you were born outside the US. The founding fathers talk about those rights belonging to everybody within US territory.
All of those rights apply in exactly the same way to foreign nationals and citizens, regardless of whether the foreign nationals here legally or illegally. Same thing with the First Amendment. It protects the right to speak. It protects even the rights of inanimate objects like corporations to speak, because the interest is in ensuring a wide, free marketplace of ideas, and immigrants are a critical part of it.
I have seen violence firsthand from ICE. I watched ICE come, and they had been in the community for a while. They ended up detaining 2 people who were outside, and they were landscapers, and come to find out that they were just being profiled. ICE agents didn't even know their names. And they were 2 brothers, and as they were being detained, they were screaming out that they have kids in the apartments that they had just left. And ICE had no regard for that. And so I ended up actually going into the apartment, and there were like 4 or 5 kids. The 2 guys were brothers, and so they were cousins hanging out. All of them toddlers except for one, who was, I think, maybe 9 or 10. And he was the only one who was tall enough to look out the window to see the parking lot where his dad and his uncle had been detained. But he just collapsed into my arms. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it happens like that in the ways that children are left behind and they are left clinging to the hat that their dad left on the front of the truck.
The unjust conduct of racial profilings by ICE has led to a drastic increase in detainings. When discussing the manner in which ICE has been carrying out their enforcement, constitutionality becomes a primary focus of the conversation.
The Fourth Amendment protects the right to be free from government interference in your homes, your persons, your effects, your papers. And it too protects the rights of all of us, not just those of us who are citizens, but all of us. It requires that the government, if it wants to come into somebody's home to search for evidence, it has to develop sufficient evidence beforehand to make it reasonable to believe that evidence of crime will be found in the place to be searched, the house. It then has to go to a judge, make that showing to the judge, and if the judge concludes that they've made a sufficient showing, then the judge will issue a warrant.
Waiting for them to put you in the van. That was really bad for me. I feel really bad when they put you like the handcuff, because they handcuff the hands, the feet, and they tie you to and then they put you in a small van and you take the trip to the courthouse. But that was torture. Those days were like the worst days. Like waiting in little rooms with a lot of people. They go for another thing, so like other crimes, and well, we didn't know. It was only two guys with me. We were there because immigration, right? Like we didn't do anything. We just got picked up by immigration. Well, I couldn't stay because they didn't allow me to stay, or they were like asking to do the process for me to get like a legal status in the United States inside the jail. Back then was like that was the only way to do it. So I met some people in the prison that they were like 2 years, 3 years waiting for just a hearing with the judge. And it didn't make sense to me to be in jail for just that. Right? I asked my release. I asked them, if you're gonna send me to Mexico, fine, I will go to Mexico. Just let me go because I didn't do anything.
People should know, for example, that in immigration court, you have the right to an attorney as long as you can pay for one, which means that if I cannot access a work permit, I cannot access any kind of work because I'm not authorized, which means that I probably am not going to be able to hire an attorney.
When you are in jeopardy of losing your liberty in a criminal court system, you have a right to an attorney. That any part of the process where you are in jeopardy of losing your liberty. Now, you don't have that protection in other areas of the law because it's afforded to you in the criminal context because you could be incarcerated. That could be the ultimate penalty that you receive. And anytime you are risking the loss of liberty. That is not the case in immigration court. You are not afforded automatically a lawyer.
As no person can be deprived of their life, liberty, or property without due process. Deporting you is a form of taking your liberty because they have to, take you physically to deport you. They can take your liberty, but they have to do it with fair proceedings where you get a meaningful opportunity to present your side.
Yo comencé a pagar a abogados para poder tener un estatus migratorio. Pueden estafar solamente con el dinero. Cuando yo llegué, yo pedí un asilo político y recuerdo que trabajaba en el campo tantas horas, 12 horas.
Immigrants are doing jobs that, a lot of citizens may not want to do, hard jobs, low-paying jobs, dangerous jobs. So, that's another hit that you see out there on social media. The idea that they are somehow taking advantage of the system. As we mentioned before, they're paying their taxes in most favors, and they're never going to see any of that money back because they can't benefit from those programs.
When we start thinking critically, this well-shaped, simplistic, violent message falls apart. These are people who are fully being taken advantage a lot of times by employers. These are people that have U.S. citizen children, which means that we're also separating families and leaving U.S. citizens without their parents.
Gasté como un total de $30,000 para poder alcanzar mi meta y tristemente en el 2017 me dijeron no, me negaron mi caso, me dieron salida voluntaria, prácticamente me estaban expulsando del país.
That's a setup. It's incredible how when somebody gets charged with a crime, we were able as a nation to see how unjust and unconstitutional was for somebody being charged of a crime, unable to pay for counsel, face a government attorney, right? And then Supreme Court decision came with the fact that the state should provide one if I cannot pay for one. But we totally disregard that on the face of immigration. Immigration court, I would say, it's a really good way to see what I would consider some of the values of this country and how we consider who should be able to access the rights. It's a reality check for a lot of people.
It's just not possible to have a fair trial where a defendant does not have a lawyer who has been trained in the law, who can make objections, pursue cross-examination, make legal arguments.
The immigration system by design is not meant to help these community members, but certainly it's being weaponized to be able to target them, even when they follow the process.
Our main immigration law goes back to 1965, and imagine driving a 1965 car. It's just not ready for the modern world, and our world has changed so much.
The judge said, okay, you're free to go. I was like, okay, good, phew. No, but it wasn't like that. The end, immigration was out there waiting for me because they called the immigration on me. They put me in jail. Back then, there was no places for immigrants. They were just sent to the real prison.
So anybody who stayed in Franklin County had been arrested for a criminal offense. During the process of their court involvement, it was determined that they were here illegally. They had an opportunity to have hearings in front of immigration judges, and they had been adjudicated and determined that they were going to be deported. And then they would come to us, where they would sit and wait for the actual deportation order. So we held probably anywhere from 40 to 50 at a given time. I think we had that relationship for probably 6 or 7 years.
The role of a sheriff in immigration enforcement is as follows. It is the will of the sheriff to opt into contracts with ICE. The transportation of immigrants from facility to facility is just one of the byproducts of cooperating with ICE in immigration enforcement.
We had several conversations among the sheriffs before I retired about the climate and culture of immigration now, and whether sheriffs who did have relationships wanted to maintain those relationships. Most sheriffs have ended any relationship they had with immigration. Very few did anything beyond what I just described Franklin County did as far as holding folks. A couple of the sheriff's offices had what we refer to as 287G relationships, where they would immigration would swear in police officers or deputy sheriffs to have powers of ICE to be able to actually check immigration status, to detain people, to be involved in immigration task forces. Very few in Massachusetts have engaged in that kind of relationship with ICE. I was sheriff, and we never utilized it. We never saw it as our role.
In addition to deputizing local agents as immigration enforcement, 287G agreements allow ICE to rent beds in local jails. Although 287G agreements are rare within Massachusetts, the reality is that they do not need those agreements in Franklin County because there are pre-existing intergovernmental service agreements, also known as IGSAs. IGSAs are a contract between state or local governments to use local jail space to hold detainees.
I think in the ways that we critique what's happening to immigrants here and think that it is incredible that people are being tossed into cages, that people are drinking out of toilets, that they don't have real food. I think we also have to question how it is connected to policies and kind of expectations of carcerality, or like wanting to lock people up if harm is caused.
There was like a really horrifically sad story that happened with a friend of ours whose son had grown up in this country. I mean, I think he was born in El Salvador, but had mostly grown up in the US. And he had some things that happened in his youth where he had gotten into trouble with the law, but he had since grown up and he had a job and he had a family and he had children. And he was picked up sort of, for something unrelated. He ended up detained and deported to El Salvador, where he had never lived as an adult. He was separated from his family. Really no hope of coming back to the US. And a really sad story is that he ended up committing suicide because he just didn't see a path forward for himself.
The reality is that people are coming here to stay and to live a life. There's I see how it's being changed. And like me, I didn't expect to stay that long, and then 20, 30 years later, I'm still here. And I don't want to.
Yo tuve la oportunidad de pasar esos procesos y no fueron fáciles. Pero bueno, aquí sigo porque yo dije, tengo mis hijos y hay que seguir adelante. Corte es terrible. Ir a una corte y que el juez te diga, bueno, yo cuando fui a mi corte me dijo el fiscal, si tú no tienes marcas en el cuerpo que de verdad como te han golpeado o tienes cicatrices, yo no creo lo que me estás diciendo. Y yo dije, ay no, estar en la corte es como que tú te estás contradiciendo con la persona y la persona te está diciendo cosas que eres una mentirosa, terrible.
Claudia is not alone with her struggles in immigration court. Thousands of immigrants face similar experiences. Asylum cases are designed to prevent legal support for people fighting in court. In other words, they're designed to deny as many people as possible.
What's required is that the proceeding be fair. And, I think to me, the biggest threat to that is the instances in which the administration is trying to deprive people of any hearing whatsoever, and the many, many, many instances in which it is trying to coerce people into giving up their right to a fair hearing by locking them up in situations that are so horrific that they will give up their case just to get out of jail, essentially.
One of the things that we're seeing in relationship to detention, it's the detention being heavily handed with those who are actually following the process. People who are going through those scheduled check-in with ICE and being detained there, or even people going to immigration court and federal agents trying to detain them while in court, following their open process, with them having a final order of deportation.
Every year, it was something that says no. Something every year for 5 years. I went to the council, I bring all these papers, everything, and they say no. And then again. So finally I got it, 5 years after, right? I got the paper, I got the visa, then I came back. I thought it was gonna be, the end of it. I was gonna go to court and then I will go home, right? But then immigration show up and then it becomes a whole nightmare of almost 2 months of being in a different prison.
Many people are concerned about the increase in ICE's presence locally. According to recent Boston CNN news on January 14th, fear has been rising. Local officials are trying to inspect the Burlington ICE facility, but have been refused many times. ICE is attempting to cover up the horrific reality that detainees face within these facilities. Activist Jared Barrison has been leading weekly protests outside the field office for 47 straight weeks.
People have to come to this office from hundreds of miles away, and the more they can inconvenience them and make them terrified, because anytime anybody goes in this building for a routine appointment, they might not come out. And we have seen family members waiting outside and their loved ones have never come out. And so that's a reality that they're very much aware of.
And I think these are also built for criminals. I think that there's not a way for kids to have places to play or for people to worship their religion. So the newer detention centers that are growing faster are just getting more and more crowded because of quotas for how many people they arrest. And then they're not meant to house people in a really humane way.
Each cell has one exposed toilet inside with a video camera mounted above. There is no privacy. And sometimes they're crammed with anywhere from 40 to 70 people. So imagine being trapped in a windowless concrete room that's essentially an open bathroom. And oftentimes, unsurprisingly, those toilets clog and don't work. So the conditions, the stench is horrible. It's freezing cold in that concrete. There are no beds. So if people are able to sleep, they're sleeping right on the floor. Whether they're a young man, whether they're a pregnant woman, they're all treated the exact same inside this building. And there's also been widespread reports from immigrants who have been released, who testify under oath, that they're given hardly any food.
Nothing in the prison is in Spanish, like, it's bad. And that's why people are like missing the core hearings. They don't know that information. They don't know how to navigate these things. Even if like you have the right to be free, if you don't know, you're just waiting there for a hearing that you keep missing.
Some people dealing with these conditions have been wrongfully detained. With a lack of resources and compassion, people are unable to navigate their cases in court without legal support.
Another problem is unlawful detention. You have a right to be free unless there is a reason for you not to be free. And generally speaking, the fact that you may have committed an immigration infraction, you may have overstayed your visa, or you may have worked while you're here on a student visa, those are not crimes. Those are civil infractions. You can be deported for those. But the government can't lock you up unless it can show that you pose a risk of flight or a danger to the community.
So in Chicago, there was ICE and Border Patrol rappelling out of helicopters and going into apartment buildings, and then pulling people, including kids, out of their beds, and including U.S. citizens. So this operation actually got publicized. The other ones rarely do, right? They happen in the early morning. No one even knows.
So my son had some really good stuff in his class, and they opted to leave the country. I think they might have gone to Spain or something, because they had come here, under, I think, TPS, and their TPS was revoked. And so they were forced to leave. They didn't really have a choice, because then from one day to the next, they were suddenly, quote unquote, illegal. And so even though they had been here, under TPS. So there's the cases of self-deporting, and then there's also cases of enforcement actions that I've heard about anecdotally that I can't say the person directly, but I know that we have had folks detained. Amherst, although they haven't done sort of like massive raids like we've seen in the scale of Minnesota, there have been enforcement actions in town.
In order to minimize the number of people being detained by ICE, the cities of Amherst and Greenfield both have passed ordinances that limit their municipal enforcement's cooperation with federal agents. Catherine Golub co-organized the campaign to pass Greenfield's Safe City Ordinance in 2019.
A city official shall not inquire as to an individual's immigration status. A city official shall honor judicial warrants, but shall not respond to an ICE request for notification about the incarceration status or pending release of a person in custody, and shall not otherwise communicate with ICE about a person who is in its custody. And to the extent permissible by law, a city official shall not perform the functions of an immigration officer.
The Safe City bylaws provide a level of protection to immigrants within the city by limiting the ability of city employees to act as federal immigration agents or request people's immigration status. However, in accordance with federal law, the city bylaws do not prevent local officials from sharing information about an individual's immigration status with federal agents.
Creo que es bien difícil. Es un caso muy vulnerable y las personas enfrentan mucho miedo al poder ir a una corte o a un proceso legal sin la representación de un abogado, debido a que en el momento quizás puedan firmar documentos y ellos no van a saber qué tipo de documento están firmando. Quizás también puede haber confusión extrema, donde ellos no van a entender los términos técnicos sobre leyes porque no saben como de abogacía.
Sadly, our immigration court system that follows on the executive branch has systematically disregarded a lot of the political, social issues that the U.S. created for decades in Central and South America.
Asylum in the United States often centers on the contrast between the search for safety or opportunity and the harsh realities of enforcement. These stories frequently highlight the trauma of family separation, the fear experienced by undocumented communities, and the challenges faced by those seeking asylum. detained immigrants continue to share their experiences with legal rights abuses and the psychological strain of incarceration.
It's interesting how, for a fair amount of years, Haiti has been a country that has not been advised by the US government to travel because of the high level of violence and instability. But at the same time, the executive branch has been trying to deport people. And not only that, to end temporary protected status, TPS, for Haitians. And temporary protected status, the classification is given to countries that are facing natural disaster or political turmoil or social turmoil, right? Which Haiti fits perfectly. So in one hand, the US government, it's advising their own nationals that it's extremely dangerous to travel to that country. And at the same time, it's trying to end a program that allows people to be lawfully in the US just for the sake of getting rid of them, even though when the government fully knows that it's not safe for them to go back to the country. That's a really good representation of the immigration system in the US.
You know, in most instances, people are allowed to remain here, but not under the Trump administration. What it has done is entered into deals where it basically pays countries to take these folks. You're a Salvadoran and you suddenly find yourself put on a plane without any explanation and flown to some country in Africa where you don't speak the language, you don't know anybody, and you have no access to any kind of legal defense whatsoever. And as a technical matter, the government can do that because the protections, torture protection or asylum, refugee status, withholding of removal, it's often called, are country specific.
The government is using third country deportations as a way to speed up the process of removal for multiple reasons, like people who are unable to be returned to their home country, and to prevent people from fighting their cases, not giving them a chance to represent themselves in court. The 1951 Refugee Convention and the Convention Against Torture prevents the government from deporting people to their home country if they'll face harm or life-threatening conditions. This is a crucial part to understanding why third country deportations happen. Third country deportations are a loophole to the Convention Against Torture law.
What we're seeing now is an uncomfortable truth, which is the level of visibility that these actions are being carried. The level of violence and the level of impunity is brand new. And because of the authority that the executive branch has on national security and the Department of Homeland Security, you have an agency that can change dramatically from one administration to the next one. It's really important to understand that when the federal government is attacking specific demographics, citizens of this country, we should go local. In the way how the US works and the way how Massachusetts works, the control of the municipality with every city department, including the police department, is really high. And it's high from the point of view of their ability to establish policies and establish the way how the police department functions.
Lori Trahan, representative of Massachusetts' 3rd District, including Lowell, Lawrence, and Concord, completed a tour of the ICE facility in Burlington. She states that the aggressive tactics used by ICE under the second Trump administration have resulted in many documented cases of people with no criminal record being detained. She also condemns tactics that result in children being detained with immigration sweeps that target parents. It is absolutely unacceptable that we arrest children, says Trahan. Using children as bait, it's just not okay for that to happen in the United States, never mind Massachusetts.
So the most common situation that folks are finding themselves in is they get abducted on the street, they get brought to this facility, they're not allowed to make phone calls, and if someone is detained here, they will not allow lawyers inside the building to meet with their clients. So they're essentially incommunicado with the outside world, which means they often have no legal representation. Their families have no idea where they are. And so they'll usually be held here for a few days, sometimes longer, but the average is a few days. And then the same unmarked black vans that brought them in will drive them out and take them to Hanscom Airfield in Bedford, Massachusetts. It's just one town over. And there is where ICE will fly them out to various parts of the country, most commonly Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. And so that's sadly what often happens. And the challenge with that is, obviously they're thousands of miles away from their families, but if they have legal representation, their lawyers are here in Massachusetts. And so their lawyers cannot access them to meet with them wherever they're taken.
The thing that frustrates me more than anything else, if you look at history and current affairs, is this is now the second 2-year block of time where Donald Trump has been president with a Republican Congress. What better time to enact immigration reform? And they don't do it. And why don't they do it? They don't do it because they want immigration as a political issue. They don't want to solve it.
ICE has expanded its interior enforcement operations, creating a pervasive climate of fear that limits the rights of immigrants and their families, using unconstitutional tactics designed to bypass due process and force individuals into self-deportation or voluntary removal. Even when they have legal claims to remain in the US, agents often interrogate family members, including children, at gunpoint to locate targets, causing severe psychological trauma and creating a chilling effect where families avoid schools, hospitals, and even churches.
I know quite a few people who live in town right now in Franklin County who are not going to work at the moment because of their fear of being picked up at work or in transit.
They are going to posture. They are not going to necessarily get physical, but they are going to posture. Like, you have to open the door. You have to let us in. So community members of any kind, knowing the rights and understanding the differences is what, in exercising the rights, is what provokes these sort of circles of accountability where people actually can defend themselves from a malpractice of law enforcement.
So I went to New Haven prison for like 2 weeks, then in Hartford, and it was around for like a month and a half. And in that time, I remember all my group, all my people, all my community were asking for my release, my freedom. Actually, there is some videos or some pictures that I was in jail and the people were protesting outside of the federal government, federal building in Hartford, and with the signs that free Eric Sarmiento, right? Like, I've been holding it with the names of the people, but to see my name and those, like, it touched me, like, wow. People were doing something to get me out of that.
Within these times of crisis, people have been relying on hope and optimism to reach out to their communities and propel them forward into fighting for change.
Yo siempre creo y tengo mucha fe que en un día no muy lejano yo voy a tener un estatus migratorio. Yo creo que Dios lo va a hacer en mi vida. Así que tengo mucha esperanza.
And so when someone is as brazen about it as President Trump is, I think that really activates and motivates people to take action.
Edith Cunha is an artist and activist who holds weekly standouts in Turner's Falls. As a Portuguese immigrant, she was originally worried about going out and protesting. Edith began taking action alone, but slowly, week by week, more locals began to join her.
Yesterday was a day when I didn't feel hopeful, but you don't stay in those places, and you figure out the things that will lift you out of it. And sometimes it's just talking to somebody else. Isolation is the worst. It's really bad for depression. It's really bad for democracy. You know what I mean? You need to be able to get out of yourself and reach out.
I will not stop. They keep coming more aggressive. We will organize better. I don't know how, but we will do it.
Y no me importaba. Yo dije, bueno, voy a seguir la vida como, no voy a tener miedo porque si vivo de miedo, no voy a poder salir de ahí. Y tengo que seguir adelante por mis hijos y por mi familia. Y llegué a un punto que sí, como yo digo, el miedo es natural. Sentía miedo, pero no dejé de hacer mi vida.
There are actually protests just about every day of the week now here, except Sundays, I believe. So Friday through Saturday, between 11 and 1, there's always going to be people here who support immigrants.
Lydia Van Evera and Tony Matloff have been organizing a GoFundMe to receive donations of toys, books, food, and other items to give out to individuals entering and exiting the ICE facility, helping those in need.
Yeah, it really makes a difference to the people who are leaving if they get food or a toy or a book if they have kids, something to read, and not just people standing outside with a sign that they probably can't read.
We get a lot of people that don't necessarily want food, but we get smiles and thank yous, and it just makes it all worth it.
This hat is a hat that symbolizes patriotism, but not patriotism in the negative sense, but patriotism and resistance. People started wearing these hats as a silent way to resist. Those kinds of symbols are really important, I think, because then you look around and you recognize each other and you know that you're not alone. You know, it boosts you.
¿Por qué nosotros podemos hacer un colectivo y organizarnos en contra de estos abusos que están pasando? Así que creo que sí influye mucho el trabajo que hacemos como organización para poder enseñarle. Incluso en estos momentos de miedo, es lo que yo les digo, si nosotros no nos unimos como comunidad, ¿quién se va a unir para pelear por nosotros?
At times like this, people need to know they're not alone. There needs to be solidarity.
Bueno, lo que nosotros hacemos vecinales, donde las personas vienen y tenemos encuentros para poder entender las necesidades locales que están pasando actualmente, y también organizamos eventos familiares de nuestras culturas donde compartimos juntos.
I start building community in Hartford, a community that start organizing themselves for better rights to immigrants.
Para poder transformar ese miedo en fuerza. Y de ese modo, nosotros también les enseñamos que solo el pueblo salva al pueblo.
We can't change the world overnight, but we can try.
Immigrants and their allies move from survival to collective action, transforming fear into political power and community resilience. Throughout our journey, we've learned about the ways that we can respond to fear and how to combat it.
I think we just really need to be pushing back against the idea that this is okay, because one of the things that is most alarming is that, like, the violence that we see in the streets of Minnesota or Los Angeles or Portland, just like the violence that we see in a lot of global conflicts right now, it really normalizes abuse and violence in a way that I think numbs us to it. But I mean, this is really, we're living in extreme times, and those things should not be going down in the streets, no matter your status. Yeah, in the country. It's just that, like, you know, we're just all in our little bubbles, right? And we don't talk to our neighbors. So I think having just like more opportunities to talk in dialogue, and with the help of, you know, interpretation or translation as needed, of if you know an immigrant and you confront them and you talk to them, you're much less likely to have these negative views.
That was built by immigrants. Tell me somebody who's not an immigrant in this country, except for the native people. I mean, we are all immigrants to this country, right? So why did all of our people, well, my people were enslaved, that's why we go. But think about your families and your ancestry, and how did they get here? And why did they come? You know, they came seeking a better life. They came seeking an opportunity, you know, to not just struggle, but to thrive, and to be a part of a country that, you know, made that possible. And so we need to create immigration policy that is fair, that is just, that is adhering to due process, and that allows people to do just that, because it only makes us better.
This is what it looks like when bullies get in charge. So even now in your life, if you're seeing someone being mean to somebody else, it might not seem like a big deal, but if you do nothing, if you say nothing, you're actually complicit.
Only white men were able to make the decisions for an entire country. We certainly don't want to go back to that, but I think it's a threat to the like-minded people, NAGA and so forth, that the country is changing in terms of who is in this country. We need to come up with an immigration policy that is humane, and that we adhere to a process that allows people to come through the country, you know, that was built by immigrants.
With the violent tactics ICE is using in their current deployment, some states began resisting ICE by passing policies to protect immigrants and their families. In early 2026, Massachusetts signed Executive Order Number 650, restricting ICE from entering non-public spaces such as schools or hospitals without a warrant. In New Jersey, the Privacy Protection Act limits the collection or sharing of personal data and documents with ICE so that they can't invade healthcare records to make sure people are safe to seek out medical care. These are current ways the state is working to restrict ICE and help immigrants. More is currently being proposed across the U.S.
So it's really important that the municipality is protecting our neighbors, creating trust between the municipality, the police department, and the immigrant community. We want people who are being the victims of crimes to be able to report. We want somebody who is being taken advantage by a landlord being able to go to the housing authority without the fear of being targeted. because of citizenship and status, and immigration status. We want somebody who is a survivor of sexual abuse and domestic violence to be able to go to the police department and make a report without being fearful of being detained.
As of early 2026, the U.S. immigration policy has shifted towards aggressive enforcement, resulting in historically low border crossings and a focus on mass deportations, reducing net migration. This caused widespread fear among immigrant people and communities, also impacting labor sectors like construction and agriculture, staining families across the U.S.
I would like for immigration policy in this country to not be based in xenophobia, racism, and kind of an inherent belief that people are criminals until they prove themselves otherwise. I wish that our immigration policy saw people as real people who have complicated lives and they don't have to be a perfect person to be worthy of a space in this country.
Allies also need to know what really is happening. Need to understand the particularities and how immigrant community and everybody's being targeted. The second, I would say, it's always follow the lead of immigrant-led organizations. Don't reinvent the wheel. The fact that people haven't heard about something doesn't mean that it's not happening. I know that urge that people have that, oh, I never heard about this, so now nobody should know about this, or probably nobody knows about this. Don't jump into that wagon, but approach advocates working with undocumented folk, with immigrants and immigrant-led organizations have been doing this work for decades.
Feel scared while we might feel angry. There are people living this every single day, all throughout their day. And so to the extent that all of us can kind of lean into some of that anger and do something, anything, we should be. It's going to take a lot more than just the people that are already engaged to be able to move things on kind of a larger level. But I think that part of it is taking action, part of it is realizing how much these things are interconnected. Capitalism and private prisons are connected to the way that people are being beaten on the streets, connected to the way that communities are redlined.
Immigrant stories are essential tools for survival, identity building, and social change, acting as bridges that connect personal resilience to future generations while fostering empathy in a new society. Taking action across communities turns bystanders into advocates, allowing immigrants to move from a state of survival into an active, community-driven place of hope.
We have been very comfortable, right? And so democracy has just been something that's around us and we don't need to do anything about it. It's not true. You have to defend it, you have to work it.
Another form of accountability is popular accountability. We are a democracy. And so if you don't like what the government is doing, it's your government. You can go out and protest. You have a First Amendment right to go out and protest. You have a right to peaceably assemble. You have a right to associate with others to advance your interests.
Tenemos personas blancas, aliados que ellos están dispuestos a ayudar. Y pues yo siempre digo, recuerden que la solidaridad no es un acto de caridad, sino que es ayuda mutua entre nosotros mismos y que tenemos que luchar por un mismo objetivo.